Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest again this week is Norm Currie, the host of Channel 31's Multi-Faith and Inter-Faith program, Harmony and Diversity. Welcome back, Norm.
Thanks. Good to be back.
Great. We're going through a Stargate today. We're going to go into other worlds, and
yes,
it'll be a white water rapid ride. Okay.
That's right.
So last time you left us just hanging with the thought of unconditional love. So we're going to come back and we're going to start there.
Yes.
Let's unpackage this magnificent gem. Tell me some of the facets of it.
Yes, well, you say that easily, of course, but it's a much more difficult task than that, and I'm trying, even though I've worked with it for a long, long time, I still find myself feeling for the ways to really grab it, and because it's actually something which our whole intellectual process, our thinking process, we create all sorts of images and all sorts of concepts, and actually what sits behind unconditional love is actually the surrender of all of that, and just to simply become a giver of self without condition. So if you look at it as being an issue of perhaps beingness, it's a continuum. And I was talking to someone the other day about, they gave me an example of where would you apply the paradigm of unconditional love. And I'll just reiterate that paradigm is the fact that from that perspective, I hold, and any who support the paradigm hold, that our sole purpose in being is to be an expression, a perfect expression of unconditional love. So they were saying to me, they were aware of this, and they were saying to me, well, how can you distinguish between parties? In this particular case, it was to do with domestic violence, which is a very current issue at the moment. And it came down to the point, this woman is a feminist, and there's nothing wrong with being a feminist, but it actually, in her case, she tended to be a bit myopic, and she was heavily riding the issues with females, which are great. It's a serious, serious issue. However, there's another party. In fact, there's a multiplicity of parties, because there's not just the male involved, but there's all the people around the male, the family, all his experiences, and for the female as well. The paradigm itself, which would establish the quality of the love which has gone through those relationships, is to go right back to the baseline in all of the players to look at what is the quality of the love in their life. The male side of that component may have suffered the most terrible abuse of the quality of his love. It's not something which is physical abuse. It's simple if it's physical abuse. You can always put a Band-Aid on, but this is deeper than that. This actually goes into this shy, tender expression of love on the part of a child, for example, which when it's abused or broken, that often will stay with the person forever. It's some of the things that people sit on lay at least, on a psychiatrist's couch about, is what is this broken love which rests within you? So unconditional love is to be able to love the other if with full awareness that you are giving, there's no sense of I want anything in return, and to also know that you are holding the most precious, precious part of the person and the precious part of life itself in your hands. And if you don't handle that properly, if you don't not correct someone in a kind and gentle way, or reprimand them in a kind and gentle way, or love them in a kind and gentle way, not in a way which says, if I love them this way, then I'll get this return, which we all are aware of, and that's underpins a lot of sexual dysfunction, because there's the requirement of the sexual gratification in all of the action that you give. And us men suffer from that a little bit.
So we're saying that we need to understand nurturing.
Yes.
But are we often unaware that what we're nurturing is an unresolved grieving of something?
Absolutely, that's a really powerful issue, and a good place to start with that, I think, is, say, in Australia, and I subscribe to this view, and it's been around for quite some time, but Australia is a country founded on grief, and it's the grief of the Aboriginals losing their nation. The people who came here, most of them didn't want to be here. That grief has rested in the soul of the nation. All of the migrants, most of the migrants, not all of them, but most of the migrants have come, and they've come under bad circumstances, many of them. They've left behind suffering, they've left behind relatives, they've left behind the hope of ever going back to their life again. So that swims around. I think grief is something, and I've done a lot of searching to try and find a good word to describe this grief, because if you look in the dictionary, grief looks like it's something which is on the surface, like oil on the water, and you can just get it off and it'll all be okay. Well, I'm sure they don't mean that, but they're certainly not true. And so it's this issue of saying, and that's where the broken love, that child reaching out to give love to a parent who is in a bad mood and turns around and squashes that love. And some of the stories you hear about that, or what parents do, is unbelievable. And that child carries the grief of lost love and broken love for the rest of their life. And it depends on, it's like the straws that breaks the camel's back. And so, in my humble view, many of the psychological problems which people carry are straws of broken love on their back. And it's difficult to see those straws, but my belief is they're there and they're very heavy.
Yes. I think one of the gifts that women bring is this nurturing process.
Yes.
And I think they get disappointed when the kid becomes a teenager, and suddenly it's almost as if they're ignoring and walking away from 12, 13 years of nurturing.
Yes.
And so there's a grief. But what they've given can be learned, and so we'll come back to some of this drilling down into what we might call deep ecology.
Yes.
You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Norm Currie, the host of Channel 31 Multi-Faith and Inter-Faith program, Harmony and Diversity. Norm, I introduced today about whitewater rafting down a river. Tell me about the River of God.
Thanks for that introduction. The River of God is actually it's an Upanishad, Shvetashvatara Upanishad, and I just wanted to sort of establish the River of God. And forgive me with my reading. Here I go. In the depths of meditation, sages saw within themselves the Lord of love, who dwells in the heart of every creature. Deep in the hearts of all he dwells, hidden behind the principles of law, energy, and inertia. He is one. He it is who rules over time, space, and causality. The world is a wheel of God, turning around and around, with all living creatures upon it. The world is a river of God, flowing from him and flowing back to him. And that last line of flowing back to him really ties into this unconditionality of God unconditionally loving and taking the unconditional love back, the cycle of love itself. Now that's a Hindu observation, but I could find quotes from many other religions which would support that same view. It's this wholeness, this unity, this oneness.
So would Jesus have got the sense of this when he says, and I just wrote a few notes down, he's calling us back, those of us who have lost sight of soul, lost sight of this deep need to work through grief, the grief that we're carrying. He says, come unto me and find that rest.
undoubtedly, I think this is one of the things which is so powerful about the scriptures of all of the main religions, is that as you read those scriptures, which I said last week I do daily, there's a flow of this immense energy, which is exactly what Jesus was capturing. He seemed to have been able to capture a lot of what the other religions had said in this one very short, succinct. He's much more succinct than some of the others. But yes, that is what he's saying. I'm sure.
So the deep ecology. Let's unpackage that for a moment.
Yeah, deep ecology is something which acknowledges, I believe, up to a point, but only up to a point, this concept that everything is one. And I'll just read a definition of deep ecology, and it's a contemporary ecology, an environmental philosophy characterized by its advocacy of the inherent worth of living beings, regardless of their instrumental utility to human needs, and the advocacy for radical restructuring of modern human societies in accordance with such ideas. Now, the key bit in there, which comes into the state of beingness, is the inherent worth of a living being, regardless of their instrumental utility for human needs, which throws the whole concept of weeds. Weeds are something which, we find growing in our garden, and those are cursed weeds, and we spray them, we kill them, we do all sorts of stuff with them. Their view, of course, is that they might not be of use to you, but each one has its own intrinsic value and, in fact, an entitlement to exist. It's this, they lead into the potential for us to be in family at all place, in family, in connection with all. The problem is encountered with deep ecology in the sense that there's a view that, and it's not. I said unfortunately. I shouldn't say that. I'm making a value judgment there. This is because of ecofeminists in the organisations and in the thought process. They have a belief that women, and it's a well-founded belief, they have the right to choose their sexual partners, which of course they do, to manage their fertility in a safe way, which includes a right to access to safe abortions. Now, there's no argument about whether the abortion is safe or not. In fact, it's not even the process of abortion. It's the process which comes back to what we were discussing before about the domestic violence. It's actually the layers that go before the process of abortion. What are the layers of love and compassion which go before that? Like the conception of the child. What happened there? What about the other half of the child, which is the male? What's his story? And the story is not about anything other than the quality of love. What is the quality of the love in what I'm about to do? And I think the deep ecology, whilst I support it because of its desire to encompass all of beingness, there's this slippage where there tends to be, it goes off into politics, it goes off into political correctness, when in fact it needs to be going off into, hey, where is the totality of love and compassion and the baseline of the paradigm in all of this? And I think it changes the perspective.
Okay, so if we're talking about life has value, that we have respect here, might it come back to an example of the meal table, and we can say cheap grace, or we can, I remember a rabbi who not only says, I thank you for the processes of putting the food on my table, the farmer and so forth, but let us also pick it up and eat it with utter enjoyment and thanksgiving, rather than, oh God, we thank you for the food, without any deeper recollection to how it got there.
Absolutely. My mind goes to the plastic tray and Glad wrap and meat in the supermarket, which an urban child of today may not necessarily, and probably won't, connect that with the little lamb that they might have seen accidentally on the weekend while they're driving down the road. It's this failure to say at the grace, the sort of grace that I use myself, is one where I actually thank, and even when I'm peeling vegetables, it's actually not talking to the vegetable. I'm not that insane, but just as you're realising the change of form, you're changing the form of that piece of what becomes food in order to sustain yourself. Yep. So it's gratitude across the board for everything that changes so that you might be. So it's a constant awareness, which actually goes back into Australian Aborigines had this. The Sand people in South Africa the same.
Yes.
You dig most Indigenous people, I presume, you dig a hole in the ground. You don't just leave it there. You fill it again.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's take a break with that hole in the ground. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Norm Currie, the host of Channel 31 Multi-Faith and Inter-Faith program, Harmony and Diversity. Norm, we just dug a hole, and now we're going to fill it. Yes. Give me some filling material.
Good. I'll give you some filling material in the sense that just coming to abortion in this particular case, and I've done some research on this, and looking at a program called Children by Choice, and there's a lot of others there that are basically supporting women in their process of deciding whether they'll have an abortion or not, and it's not a value judgment on abortion at that point. What it is these are very well put together, and there's an example here of the sorts of things which lead to unplanned pregnancies. And there's a whole list of them, but the bottom one on the list, included amongst lack of access to contraception due to insufficient sexual reproductive health, education, high cost, unsupportive doctors, religious belief, and limited accurate explanations around contraception. Religious belief is just stuck in there as though it just looks as though they might have left a comma out of something and just stuck it in there. It's because religious belief, even though religious belief can become a prison, it can also become the key to open the door to that prison. And it's troubling to realise that, and these are American figures, but that they estimate, and it's always difficult to do, but to estimate that 80% of women who have abortions in America put their details down as being religious. They've got some religion or other. Now, last week we spoke about the fact that there weren't any religions which put a big tick in the box and said, yes, go ahead. They all premise it on the sanctity of life. In their case, they tend to emphasise the sanctity of human life, but taking that one step further and taking the deep ecological perspective we spoke about before, it's the sanctity of life itself. And so there's a question mark which arises. You say, well, what sort of religion are these women associated with? Why do they write it down like? Why do they write their religion down? Because clearly there's a key part of that which is not working, which then rolls over into some of the values which now apply. For example, adoptions. Adoptions have dropped off to an incredibly low level. Why is this so? Is this through lack of caring? If you take Debbie Lee Finesse, in the recent nominee for an Australia Day award, she raises the point that there are, I think it's, and I'll just off the top of my head, there are 11,000 children removed from homes because of their safety, and there's 50,000 children who are in pre-adoption. What's that phase? Foster, yes, exactly. So these people are out there, and they are. And her point is that if you don't love, then what is going to be the future? These children deserve love, and if they're not getting the appropriate love, we'll come back to the point we were talking about before, about grieving, which is grieving for love. It's the pain, the destruction, the agony which arises out of grieving for love is just massive.
All right, now I went silent there because I was pondering the grief that comes should a woman have a miscarriage or abortion. There is a loss of something. They're psychologically, very deeply, actually spiritually aware of a loss that cannot be described, a pain that cannot be described.
Yes.
What fills this hole, this grief hole? How is repair done?
Well, we start to then roll into from a Buddhist perspective. In fact, I won't make an exception. I think all of them. It's the fact of coming down to the baseline and saying, because in order to overcome grief, you need to move forward and leave the rest behind.
Yes.
It's a matter of deciding who you are. I paint the picture that there's two perspectives to this. There's what I am, which is the person that thinks and does and forms opinions, gets hurt, gets destroyed, gets all of that, gets pain, gets grief. But there's another part, which is who you are. And the who you are is this direct investment of the divine essence itself, the absolute investment of unconditional love in all of us, in all things, in all of existence. That encourages you, in my experience, to move forward from that grief, to realize that my life is not to rest in that grief. My life is to be unconditional love in the world, so I move forward from that, and all I concentrate on is making my love better. Make my love better. That's my sole purpose. What I am, and that might be a grieving person or an angry person or a destructive person, that's what I am. But if you have it in that way, you can look at the two of them. This is my beingness, that is my doingness, that is the what I am. So it's really that discipline of thinking, of really realizing who I am.
And acknowledging my great need of what I've lost. Okay? So again, we can respond to Jesus and come to him a source of love, divine love, and be embraced by that. So we have to allow ourselves to be embraced by what's been done, by what's been set in motion.
Exactly, and part of the acknowledgement of that is if you accept it, is to accept that the love that you reside in, the love that is who you are, is really unconditional.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter what you've done, that's not the key. The key is who you are at that point, and you move forward. It's a matter of the direction you look in.
Yes.
You know,
Norm, let's conclude there and encourage our watching audience to look to and to look for love and to embrace it when it comes.
and to be it.
You've been watching Support Life, and that's all for our program today. Join us again next week. Goodbye.